Today is July 20th, 2004. This is Judith Kent speaking from the Flagler County Public Library in Palm Coast, Florida. Joining me today is Mr. Dave Hartman, who resides in Palm Coast, Florida. Our cameraman today is Dr. William Kent. Mr. Hartman, would you tell us, just for the record, the branch of the military in which you served?
Yes, the Air Force is the one and only.
Okay, and during what period was that?
From March of 1941, when I entered the Flying Cadets, to through 1945.
Okay, so that was World War II.
Yes, World War II.
And where were you stationed most of that time?
Well, most of the time I was back in the States on staff missions at the 1st Air Force as fighter director for a while, and then in various bases. I entered the Flying Cadets early on in March of 1941, as I said, and went into combat in the middle of 1942, June of 1942, and came back in May of 1943.
Okay, and where did you see combat?
In the Western Desert. That's a strip of 1,700 miles of desert between Alexandria, Egypt, and Tunisia.
Very good. And what was your rank when you finished your military service?
It was major.
Major. Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
In the winter of 1940, there was still a depression going on, as you may know, and I was a junior at Butler University in Indianapolis, and I decided to join the Flying Cadets because the draft was coming on. My fraternity brothers were joining, and we wanted an adventure, and we wanted to be officers if war came.
So you enlisted, and that pretty much answers the question, why the Air Force?
Always intrigued with the Air Force. I built a lot of model airplanes and just wanted to fly. That's it.
It was a dream.
It was a dream, really. We in those days, I think many of us joined for the reasons I just said. We wanted the adventure. There was a bonus of $1,500 after 2 years of service, after you were graduated from the Flying Cadets.
Was that a pretty competitive kind of situation?
Oh, yes, it was very competitive. Many good pilots, good men were washed out, as they say. Somehow I survived.
What do you attribute that to?
I think I've given some thought to that question. I believe we were just competitive in those days. We were competitive in sports. And it was a kind of competitiveness that didn't end in anger if you lost. You just wondered why you lost and you determined to do better. And it was just that attitude that was more or less ingrained.
Was that pretty much a family value that you?
I found it throughout my friendships with others in general, with kids my age.
So your training progressed, I guess, through a logical sort of sequence.
The Flying Cadets was a 7.5-month program, 3 phases. Primary for 13 weeks, basic, the famous Randolph Field in San Antonio, Texas, and then an advanced 13 weeks of flying, advanced school, which in my case was Victoria, Texas.
Okay.
And you had ground school in the morning and flight school in the afternoon, generally.
Mhm. And how did you get into the role as a fighter pilot?
In the advanced training period, we were asked what our preference was, bombers, transport, or fighters. And I had no hesitation. I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Mm-hmm.
It was more maneuverable, apparently, from our perception, more exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I've chosen.
Mm-hmm. And you weren't sorry about that?
No, never
It
was.
was a good decision? Okay. You say that after your training, you were set to enter combat. What was that transition like? You had been in the States training. How did you get to
Well,
Egypt?
after the famous Casablanca conference, it was determined that Rommel, the German general, and his Army of Africa Corps had to be stopped. And this place to stop it was at El Alamein, Egypt. And we were hurried from our various air bases along the East Coast after graduation from flying cadets. We were just hurried into getting the shots and boarding the aircraft carrier for the trip across to be launched just out of Accra, Africa. And all 72 of us in the fighter group were successful in taking off, and we were the first Army fighter group to take off of a Navy carrier successfully. There was one other group ahead of us that had a number of problems in taking off, and crashes and so forth.
So you took off from the carrier, then you landed on
I landed at Accra. We're given a glass of lemonade, a pith helmet, some maps, and some mosquito boots. And we immediately flew in sections of 5 or 6 on Pan America, escorted by Pan America and guided by Pan American transport planes that knew the cross Africa route to Lagos, which was another hour's flight. And that first night I slept on the porch of the club under mosquito netting with my .45 pistol under my pillow, and went to sleep with the strange jungle sounds of birds and animals just out there somewhere. Then the next morning I was awakened by this was before dawn, it was dark, by a set of white teeth and a turban. That's all I could see in the dark, but it was one of the natives who turned out to have claw marks on both, I think they were tribal marks on both cheeks. And with a cup of hot tea, and we took off at dawn, flew across into Chad, across Nigeria, then across Chad, and then into the Sudan, and ultimately to Khartoum, where we all regrouped those 5 or 6 plane flights into the 72 group.
And you were with the same group, pretty much?
Yes, going across. I was with this one group, and we covered that 2,600 miles in 52 hours, I believe. That's flying and sleeping, going across the various jungles. And from Khartoum, after we regrouped, checked our engines, had the engineers check them. We flew then onto Cairo. And we spent a week in Cairo before going on to Palestine, as it was called in those days, to an air base called Maccabela. It was just south of Haifa. And we spent a month there before we entered the Battle of Egypt in July, roughly, of 1942.
So that was your first combat.
Yes. And
what were some of your most memorable experiences?
We had, I had 70 missions. Let me hasten to say that 2 or 3 of them lasted just minutes because we took off and then were recalled when orders changed. One of my missions was only 30 seconds when I bellied in after takeoff, when my engine quit. Our missions were to escort the bombers, strafe enemy air bases and convoys, dive bomb the same. We had 3 essential missions. And I believe I had about 23 or 4 strafing missions. And the bomber escorts and dive bombing were the other balance there. I think most fighter pilots in those days, I'm rather sure of this, would tell you that strafing air bases is the worst mission you can be assigned to.
Really?
The enemy gun and anti-aircraft is all in place, in harmony with the other guns, and you really have to fly through a lot of flak. That's about it.
What was, you were hit, your plane was hit with flak and artillery?
Yes, most of us got hit. I had a few. One of those missions was at Charing Cross. A flight of 8 of us, and my squadron commander, Pudge, flying abreast at treetop level, only there were just scrub trees there, caught this convoy along the road, along the Mediterranean. It's the only road in and out, east and west. And it was about 2 miles long. And we went across it the first time, strafing, and went out over the Mediterranean, turned around just at the top of water, and came back, and to Pudge's credit, he hit them again, only about a mile up. Now we had a standing rule in those days of only one pass over a target, because after that they've set up their guns that are going to respond in big time. I think Pudge was the extra courageous type, and we followed. I mean, there was no flinching. It's just awful to strafe trucks and see men climbing out, but we did a war-winning job that day, and that was what we were there for. As I went over the last truck I was shooting, I saw 2 figures way out running away, and I thought, well, I'll get them too, but I couldn't get any lower without hitting the ground, and so I couldn't shoot them. And just at that time, I got the bullet through the windshield. Came in on the left, went out the right. Sounded like 2 paper bags popping in your ear, large pops, and some red streaks. And I thought, not quite rationally, that I was being attacked by a German plane. So I turned to meet it. and I saw no plane, and then I turned back and started heading out, and I pressed the transmission button on the throttle, and I said, "Pudge, I've been hit." And the sweetest words I ever heard in my life came back across. "Davy, how are you, and where are you?" That was my squadron commander. And by that time, I had a couple of drops of blood had started trickling off my upper lip, and I realized I'd been hit, but I didn't feel anything. The engine noise coming through the two holes was deafening, and it tended to discombobulate me a little. But I climbed out, and Pudge came over and looked around. He couldn't see much going with that. And we flew home, and he asked me as we were preparing to land. We always landed and took off 12 abreast because of the dust. We couldn't come in one after another. We had no runways. It was just desert, sand that we landed on, which was a thin film of sand on top of limestone. That was it. Put oil barrels in one corner of a square mile section of land, and we just landed there. So we went into. He asked me if I wanted to land by myself, naturally. And probably every member in the flight wished I would, because they didn't want someone crippled to be dancing alongside of them on the landing. But I wouldn't leave that brood for anything at that point. I was beginning to get a little shocked, so I landed with them.
Safely.
Safely. And then the next nicest thing was, at least my perception of the crew chief's tenderness when he helped me out of the cockpit. He was quite nice. That's it.
How badly injured were you?
Oh, just scratches. It was just a lot of cuts from windshield glass. And I got a little piece of coping right there. There's still some dirt there. But to my flight surgeon's credit, and to Dick Ryan, the operations officer, his credit, the following happened. The next morning, of course I had a few Band-Aids around. Next morning we gathered at the operations tent for our assignments for the day. And I could hardly believe it, but they assigned me to the first strafing mission that next morning.
Get back on that horse.
That is, truly, I had started to feel sorry for myself, and I'm sure the little shock and fear was coming on. But that next strafing mission cured it all. Our methods were very simple and direct out there.
Sounds like you have a lot of respect for your fellow officers.
I do. Just the best.
There's some that stand out from the others particularly.
Well, the aforementioned Dick Ryan and Pudge, he was shot down later and became a POW. It might interest you to know that of the 72 pilots that went over, 33, well, let's make it 22 were killed in action, and 11 were POWs. So essentially, that was 33. So essentially, 50% of us did not come back at that time. Pudge was so courageous, and all of the guys were just exemplary in their courage and competency. They were so quietly competent, you know.
So their training paid off.
A lot of them came from the, from the cornfields of a Midwestern state. We had 2 years of college. It was required in the flying cadets, minimum. And they just were wonderful guys, you know. Never, there was no criticism. If you did something wrong, No one rode you. There was no competition or anything like that between us. I never saw anger between us. It was just 10 months of real comradeship.
And you had a support crew with you also, I would assume.
Oh, the enlisted men. And the engineering officer, Fred Ryan, and Buck somebody, the top sergeant on the maintenance line, and my crew chief. They were all just wonderful, you know.
What was the camp like? What were the conditions?
Well, we moved, I looked this up, we moved 14 times over the 1,700 miles. And we would have what's called an A party and a B party. The A party with the tents and so forth would start out by trucks. We, the pilots, put our cots and bedroll and canteen of water in the back end of the plane over the radio, went off on a combat mission, escorted bombers or strafed or dive bomb, and then we landed at the advanced field.
Uh-huh.
And that night, because the A party had not caught up with us, we slept under the wings of our planes out in the open and just ate whatever rations we could take along with us. Well, it was quite that way all the way through. Yeah. And no runways, no shops, no maintenance like that. Everything was done out in the open.
You showed me a picture with one of your crew on your wing. Tell me about that.
Well, it was, from the pilot's view, it was hard to see the little slit trenches that we dug, small trenches where we would dive into when we got bombed or strafed. And so our crew chiefs would meet the planes as we landed. They would run out in the field and climb on the wing and then guide us because they could see the trenches better than we could. And I still taxied into one. So we needed all the help we could get.
So it was a real team effort.
It was. Yes.
And on a more normal day, when your group had caught up with you, what would the rations be like?
Oh, it was terrible. We ate only English food, lamb stew, basically. In the mornings we had some bacon and homemade bread with our coffee. And I learned to love bacon sandwiches,
really?
Which I had for breakfast. I mean, there was no milk, no cereals, no fruit. I remember I went into combat with teeth in perfect condition. 6 months later, I had 6 cavities. And it was lamb stew. All of us got sick of it one way or another, and we raided our emergency rations that were in our parachutes, which had candy bars and a can or two of sardines and some other stuff. Well, we ate all that too. And we just left the fishing hook and fishing line in the middle of the desert in our packs. We did run across some gazelle.
Gazelle?
Little mirage-like deer. And we thought, well, we will get some fresh meat. My buddies all had German Mauser rifles because the infantry would keep walking through our airfields sometimes in the afternoon or night, getting ready for another fight. And most of us had Lugers. They would just sell them. They'd pick them off the German corpses and sold them to us. And I had a German parachute corps submachine gun. It had a collapsible stock. But my friends with the Mausers could not lead the Gazelle fast enough out in the desert. And so I said, "Oh, I'll get one." And I sat on the hood of the Jeep. We went out, and as soon as we saw the herd, I took that machine gun, being a real sportsman, and just raked it all the way through the herd. And then we had gazelle. And
Is that pretty good?
the guys liked me again.
So. Were you keeping in touch with your family at home at all during this period?
Yes, our means of that was letters and V-mail. And one of the chores that we didn't like was having to censor the V-mail of the enlisted men, and sometimes even of ourselves. And but it was okay. We got through that.
And who was writing you from home at that time?
The parents were writing, and they were very good. And I have a younger brother who also became a pilot at the latter stages of the war. He flew the China hump in transport planes. And they all answered, and then of course relatives sent letters. We got a box of goodies from the States, very rarely, but we did get a few.
That helped morale?
That helped morale immensely. I recall one time we were in such need of hearing from home that the airfield had been rained on, and the sand was mushy, and we couldn't even take off on it. And when the transport plane carrying our mail approached the field, we were supposed to fire either a red flare or a green flare, telling it that it was okay to land. Well, it buzzed us, and we should have shot the red flare. No, don't land. But we wanted the mail so badly, we shot the green flare anyway. And the transport was stuck there for about 4 days, but we got our mail.
So it was pretty important.
It was.
How else did you keep morale up? Did you have any kind of entertainment, or?
There was no entertainment, no USO or things like that. We just read. We played auction bridge in those days. That was before Culberson, I believe, or along with the start of it. And wrote letters. At night, sometimes we would go outside the club tent and form a squadron and sing. You know, we'd sing love songs. We'd sing. It was just kind of thrilling to be in that, you know. And that was, I think we had one visitor, Ernie Pyle, spent a few days with us. And that's the only visitor that I recall. No dancing girls.
No.
What a shame.
You do have some photographs, though. Was it unusual to have cameras in that area?
Well, I picked up a German camera at one of the markets that we visited somewhere along the line, and I got the film.
We'll include some of those with your material. Did you keep a diary or make any kind of record of your experience?
No, I didn't. I don't recall if any of the others did. I kept the letters I got from home. And as you say, the pictures. I will say that at Windsor Locks, Connecticut, up by Hartford, There's the New England Air Museum, and my group is featured in the museum with a 2,500 square foot exhibit
Oh, my.
of our campaign, pictures of our campaign.
And what was your unit called now?
The 57th Fighter Group.
Okay.
We were quite well known. We had the biggest aerial engagement that I've shown you with a picture of, where we shot down 74 enemy planes in 20 minutes. We had a number of firsts, aside from taking off the Ranger. I don't recall many of them.
Tell us about some of your medals.
Well, as pilots, we were awarded medals like the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal for a number of missions. We had to have 25 missions for the Air Medal, and then 50 missions for the Distinguished Flying Cross. My group was also awarded the unit citation twice. We have that medal, and it was also awarded, and I don't understand why, the French Croix de Guerre with Palm, which is a beautiful medal. I don't remember doing much of anything with the French over there, but they awarded us that. For the scratches and cuts, I got the Purple Heart. I went to a few days after the occurrence, I went to Colonel French, who was the administrative officer, and told him I didn't want this because I didn't really feel I deserved it. But he said, "You were cut, you bled, you're getting it." He was a man of few words. As most of them were.
That bullet had been an inch or two closer.
Then I would have really earned it.
Posthumously, probably. Okay. You said that you missed the one engagement where so many, where your group was so involved. What was your assignment at that point?
Tom Tilley, a classmate and squadron mate, and I were sent back just about a week before this large turkey shoot to this base close to the Suez Canal. And we were getting to the end of the campaign. We were already in the edge of Tunisia, going up to Tunis. And I think there were two more short stops that the group made after Tom and I left. And then the campaign was ended. But we were sent back to this base to train replacement pilots. Mm-hmm. And that was okay. We took them up and made them dogfight, and dive bomb, go through strafing missions and so forth, especially to fly the formations and get the discipline, so that they knew the signals. Mm-hmm. and didn't have to be trained. Mm-hmm. And gasoline was scarce at the front, and so you didn't have time, mm-hmm. the resources to train out there.
But they definitely needed replacements.
Oh yes, we were, and it had already been decided. I don't think we were told about it, but I know I wasn't. It was decided that our unit would be retired at the end of the campaign. And mm-hmm. they knew the end of the campaign was approaching.
Okay. So, how did that happen? How did that happen?
Oh, well, I was, Tom, for for some reason, got to return to the group, and I stayed there. I think we were in the latter training phase and only needed one of us. And I got word that the group was through and leaving, and that I was to meet them at Heliopolis Airport at Cairo. And the idea was to get from my base to Cairo. And the Air Base commander, wonderful guy, he said, take my plane and I'll pick it up at Heliopolis later. Things were loose and fluid. We met the occasions by doing something without having 14 echelons approve it, you see. And I just climbed in that plane, threw my duffel bag in the back end, as boys did. And I didn't even have a helmet. I just had a headset and goggles and flew right up over the Aswan Dam, over Luxor, right on up into past the Sphinx and so forth, all right there, and landed at Heliopolis, scribbled okay on the maintenance board, stuck it in the little side pocket, climbed out of that plane and never saw it again. And went to the operations hut, and here were my group, what's left of it, so bedraggled. At least I'd had a shower, you know. But those guys, they were so beat up, and they were all filing into the operations building. And I was so glad to see them and be back with them. And then they parceled us out to fly us home. We went to Dakar. Some of us did. We got stuck there when the general overtook our assigned plane for his mission, and we picked one up later after a couple, 3 days. We tasted their peanut beer, which was awful. I never thought I'd throw a beer away, but I did. Dakar was okay. And we climbed into this plane and then flew to Brazil, and then up the coast to Miami. And finally got back.
Did you think about making a career of it?
Not on your life. Many did, though.
Yeah.
Many of them, as you probably well know.
What did you do with your life? Did you use
Oh,
the GI Bill? Or?
I later got married before the end of the war, and of course then had to go to work some way, and I toyed with the idea of becoming an airlines pilot. I just didn't want to stay in the Army or the Air Force. I had no particular reason. I just think I was not the primmest of soldiers. I just didn't like too many orders like that, you know, all the time. Just me. And so I went to work, and after that in retail chain store business in the management end. Took the management training and went on with Sears Roebuck. And went to South America for 7 years.
Did you?
With them. They had stores there. And I flew around Brazil, Peru, Venezuela, Cuba, Mexico, and Colombia, where the stores were. And then finally became a store manager in Cali, Colombia. And that was sort of exciting too, you know.
I should say.
It's nice now to be in Palm Coast where things are a little calmer. Yes.
Did you have children?
One daughter, yes.
She had quite an upbringing, didn't she?
Well, yes, and she's now a stockbroker in Houston, Texas.
Is that right?
Mhm.
Have you been involved in any kind of veterans organizations?
No, I don't believe so. I go to the reunions and keep in touch with 5 of my buddies by email.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and that's it. I'm not a big joiner, I'm afraid.
So looking back from this perspective, you went in as a young man from the Midwest, as you say, came out having seen a lot of the world.
Well, the Air Force, the 57th Fighter Group made us grow up fast, and the experiences, and so it was since I got out okay, I have to say the same thing that many of my buddies do. It was a fabulous experience, you know. And one you certainly wouldn't want to repeat,
no.
But that's it. So I have good memories about that.
Okay. To what do you attribute, making it through? Would you think was something?
Well, there has to be something better than luck. I tell you, and that's about the only conclusion I've drawn. Something. I know one of your questions was kind of, did you have any luck charms or beliefs in anything? I just said a small prayer in the cockpit before the mission, and that was it. That's just. When you were on the missions, it became business. You had a lot of flying to do. A lot of it was dangerous. And so you didn't have much time for anything but just get the job done.
You talk about, taking fire from other airplanes as well as on the ground, artillery, and yet the weather was another factor that you had to deal with.
Oh, yes. You've heard of the dust storms, of course, in recent conflicts. It was that way with us. It was so bad that if you sat playing bridge with someone and with a foursome, and the storm was outside, the silt would filter through the tent, and it would catch on your forehead, your nose tip, and your upper lip, and your chin, and in front of you, in a half an hour to an hour of playing bridge, everybody grew to be old men, old, gray-haired, father times in front of you. You couldn't believe it.
Like a time warp.
So the dust was a bad thing.
And there was cold.
And there was cold. We had no fires. It was just
Because there was no
bundle
wood.
up and endure it, you know. So,
You told me you wore your long underwear.
long, yes, always, never took it off for 3 months. And until you got to the Hotel Shepherd, that fabulous hotel in Cairo, where you ran the native bellboys crazy by bringing you more towels and more beers, and a couple of cigars, and turn on the hot water.
Felt pretty good.
Oh, you'll never know. It was so wonderful.
Well, we thank you so much for sharing your story.
It's been a pleasure.
It's a privilege.